This lecture is about human rights, cultural identities, and new belief systems. The key concepts are 6.3 to A, B, and C. 6.3 states that new conceptualization of global economy and society and culture. And Roman numeral 2 states, people conceptualize society and culture in new ways. Some challenged old assumptions about race, class, gender, and religion, often using new technologies to spread reconfigured traditions. Part A, the notion of human rights gained traction throughout the world. We're going to look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights, women's rights, and white Australia. The UN Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN General Assembly on December 10th, 1948. The goal was to try to avoid everything that happened associated with World War II and the Holocaust. The drafting committee was 18 representatives from a bunch of states, cultures, and everything. Eleanor Roosevelt actually served as the chair of the committee. They wanted to draft some type of document that was representative of all cultures instead of just Western beliefs, which can be difficult to do when we're talking about African, Muslim, and different other cultures and Asian cultures that do not necessarily always follow Western belief systems. It took 2 years to draft it, and at that point the Cold War had started. Today, all members of the United Nations have ratified at least one of the 9 core human rights treaties. Not all nations follow all 9 parts of the human rights treaties. 80% have ratified 4 or more of the human rights treaties. So not all states have the same attitude about human rights. Women's rights, basically just to kind of look at the labor force. In developed countries like in the West, 40 to 50% of the working force is made up of women. In developing countries, only 20%, and Islamic countries, only 10% of the labor force is made up by women. The feminist movements in the 1960s and 1970s was really focusing on about the control of bodies. Women felt that the lack of birth control and the lack of access to birth control and abortions being legal limited their rights to control their bodies. And controlling their bodies and controlling how many births they have also controlled their future in regards to economics and into their health as well. So the movements of the 60s and 70s really changed the attitude about what women should and should not be allowed to do, and it really broke down gender roles as a whole. International Women's Rights Day is hosted by the UN every year, and the goal is to bring attention to all women's rights issues globally. A lot of things they look at are education, healthcare, different sexual and reproductive rights, as well as rights within the marriage relationship. That women are independent of men, and that women are not necessarily owned by men in a marriage relationship. International legislation on women's rights is completely impossible because of cultural beliefs. Cultural values and norms in different regions do not follow the same throughout the globe and the same ideas globally, so therefore creating any type of UN Declaration of Women's Rights is not going to happen. The other issue is that Western women feel that it is our job to save these poor women in these other cultural areas. Well, a lot of those women have no problems with their cultural tendencies and have no problems with following the cultural norms that they are living under. And so the issue is, where is women's rights, and where is it about rights, and where is it about changing culture? That line is very vague, and it's very difficult to figure out. The White Australia policy is a series of policies that encouraged and limited immigration from Western European countries, especially Great Britain in particular. So what Australia was doing was that they were only allowing certain races into their country. They wanted to make sure that they weren't getting in low-wage immigrants from Asia and the Pacific Islands. During World War II, the Prime Minister actually stated about the White Australia policy that this country shall remain forever the home of the descendants of those people who came here in peace in order to establish in the South Seas an outpost of the British race. So this policy obviously had racial undertones in a world where social Darwinism is no longer accepted. From 1949 to 1966, the Australian government slowly lifted the immigration limits. In 1973, the government declared that race no longer mattered in regards to immigration and that they would take anybody. In 1975, they passed a law that was called the Racial Discrimination Policy that made racially based selection criteria completely illegal. So in other words, when they would get their list of who wanted to become a citizen of Australia each year, instead of picking based off of racial preferences, they would pick off of things that the United States pick off, like education level, what different jobs we need to be filled within our country, and things like that. Today, anyone can apply as long as you meet some other requirements like language. You have to be able to write and speak in English in order to become a citizen of Australia. So when we look at B, 6.32b, states that increased interaction among diverse peoples sometimes led to the formation of new cultural identities and exclusionary reactions. We're going to talk about these 4 ideas: negritude, xenophobia, race riots, and citizenship restrictions. Negritude is actually a literary movement in France in the 1930s, and it translates, because it's a French word, it actually translates into Negro-ness. The goal was to unify black people in a post-colonial racial France. So because France colonized a huge portion of West Africa, there were a lot of black Africans living in France. And obviously you're going to get racial tensions as a result of that. Politically, they were Marxist. They were very socialist in regards to their political ideas. They also are going to include ideas from the Haitian Revolution and decolonization movements in Africa. So the majority of the people who were part of the Negritude movement were actually from Africa and were participated in the decolonization process. Xenophobia literally is defined as the fear of foreigners, and it can take 2 forms. You can actually create genocides as a result of xenophobia, or you can isolate yourself from certain cultures, and things like White Australia policy is a xenophobic policy. In 1993, the Human Rights Conference issued the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. Basically, they wanted to get the government to legislate xenophobic events and to try to prevent xenophobia from developing as a cultural norm within their country. This is in the post-genocide world and the idea of human rights and things like that. And so the idea of the UN was to encourage countries to try to find a way to allow foreigners in and live with foreigners within their country. Race riots. Countries throughout the world experience race riots. It's not just the United States. It happens when a minority race attempts to bring their plight to the surface, or an event can lead to it. So for example, in the U.S. with Los Angeles with the Rodney King verdict, obviously that created a race riot, and London actually had some serious riots in 2011. Again, it's not isolated just to the United States. Currently, one of the most common racial tensions is actually in France again. The black Africans that are coming in from northern Africa are predominantly Muslim, and so in a very socialist France, they try to limit any type of religious expression. So they recently prevented the wearing of any type of religion in public spaces. So the girls could no longer wear their headdress, just as much as Christians were not allowed to wear the cross. This became a huge controversy in France, but the law actually stuck. Citizenship restrictions. Countries can set restrictions on who can become a citizen in their country. Today in the United States, we have quotas. There's only so many people from India will allow citizenship each year. Only so many people will allow citizenship from Latin America. Like, we're very specific on the exact number of people we give citizenship to. People will sit on citizenship lists for years just trying to become a U.S. citizen. In 1795, we passed a naturalization pact that guaranteed citizenship to all free white persons who had lived in the U.S. for 5 years. So this is after our independence movement, and really actually before we were even solid with our Constitution and our government. So if you were a white person who had lived in the land that we call the United States, you were, for at least 5 years, you were considered a citizen. In 1894, we added that to anybody who had served in any type of military form. And then in 1870, the U.S. naturalized aliens of African nativity and to persons of African descent. So in the post-Civil War era, we did give citizenship to anyone associated with African ancestry. In 1882, we actually had Chinese exclusion acts where we were limiting the access of Chinese into the United States. This is when the United States first started to establish a lot of our bases. We were expanding out into the Pacific, and we were limiting our Chinese access to the United States. In 1917, we actually extended this to all Asians due to the Japanese issue. We were not allowing anyone from Asia to become a citizen of the United States. To the point where if you left and you weren't a citizen and you tried to get back in, you probably would not be able to come back into the U.S. In 1922, there was a law passed that if a woman marries a man to try to get that man's citizenship, then she would lose her citizenship. Notice that it's just women who marry men. Men can marry whomever they wish. One of the reasons for that is because of World War I. A lot of the soldiers came back with foreign wives, and we'll see it again with World War II, and of course with Korea and Vietnam. Our soldiers would bring back new wives from these countries, and those women would be given citizenship based off of their marriage relationship. However, women were not given the same right. In 1946, we have upped the number of Filipinos. There was a massive increase of Filipinos into the United States in the post-World War II era, and so we started to naturalize the Filipinos each year. 1965, we finally lift the ban on Asians, which obviously has serious ramifications today. You can see that in Stanton as well. In the year 2000, we adopted foreign children can become citizens. So if you adopt a foreign child, that child does have the right to become a U.S. citizen. Here is a website that you can actually look at on what our data is for each of our different races and what areas we allow people to become citizens. C says that believers developed new forms of spirituality and chose to emphasize particular aspects of the practice within existing faiths and apply them to political issues. So we're going to look at New Age religions, Hare Krishnas, fundamentalist movements, and Libertarian Theology. New Age religions is a Western movement that combines Western belief systems with Eastern and ancient belief systems. So it's holistic thinking about things like health, medicine, mental health, physical health. So this is where you can take the idea of a Jesus figure and you can throw in a little bit of Buddhism and create your own religion. It combines a lot of the belief systems and allow a person to create their own spirituality rather than a religion. The Unitarian Church is an example of a New Age religion that takes aspects of all of the world's religions to create some type of system. But again, it's about a spiritual journey, not necessarily about following a specific religion. Awareness of the subculture actually developed through a Hollywood or a Broadway play called Hair. Politically, it talks about minimalism and the idea of a lack of emphasis on material objects and developing those material objects and the acceptance of all belief systems. It says that the government regulation of any person's belief or lifestyle choices should not be in existence, that the government has no right to say whom you can marry or what system you can believe in or what type of religious practice you can actually use in your life. The Catholic Church and the Southern Baptist Convention have both spoken out against the New Age religion movement. They're very outspoken about the idea of taking and choosing different forms of religion to create a personal spirituality. Hare Krishnas were founded in New York in 1966, and they are based on a strict belief and practices of Indian Hindu scriptures, but it's specific parts. One of them is Bhakti Yoga, which is that the idea that all physical movements and thoughts exist to please the Supreme Lord Krishna, and the names actually come from the mantra. So there's a lot to meditation if you're a Hare Krishna, and there's a lot to minimalism and separating yourself out from society as a Hare Krishna. There's 4 practices to help one achieve your dharma. You aren't allowed to eat meat, fish, or eggs. Sex is only for procreation and only within marriage. You're not allowed to gamble, and you're not allowed to have any type of intoxicants. So no caffeine, no alcohol, no types of drugs in your system. Here's an example of what the goals of one of the Hare Krishna groups called ISKCON. ISKCON is basically like the Southern Baptist Convention or the Catholic Church. Like it's like a supreme organization of the Hare Krishnas, and you can read through these and kind of look at what Hare Krishnas believe. Christian fundamentalism has developed as a reaction to modern interpretation of biblical text. It basically supports the idea of original text and its perfection, and it should be followed exactly. So a lot of people who consider themselves to be Christian fundamentalists learn Greek because they want to read it in its original language. It promotes the absolute belief in the virgin birth, the resurrection, and the second coming of Christ. Politically, Christian fundamentalists, these groups can become very militant and are referred to as a Christian right. The Westboro Baptist Church is considered a Christian fundamentalist group. You can go onto YouTube and actually find tons of information and tons of propaganda from the church as well about their belief system. Islamic fundamentalism promotes a return to the absolute practice of the original Islamic teachings. It actually caused the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and a lot of your radical groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda use Islamic fundamentalism to promote their belief system and applying their politics to the belief system that they're promoting. Libertarian is actually a practice within the Roman Catholic Church. It interprets the teaching of Jesus in regards to his role in liberating people from unjust social, political, and economic situations. Most of the people who consider themselves libertarian are actually in Latin America. The Vatican does not promote this Marxist system. You have to remember that within the Roman Catholic Church you have a hierarchy of belief. You have the bishops and the pope and the priest, and that they are set aside and special. So in a Marxist type of Roman Catholic religion, you're gonna have equality. Well, obviously that's not gonna work. John Paul II spoke against Jesus as a political figure and actually stated that Jesus was meant to be 100% a spiritual figure and a religious figure. And the Vatican does not feel that this political movement within the Catholic Church is something that is necessary, and they do not promote it.